Session where we'll be delving into the Future of Knowledge Foresight report. It sounds as a Foresight report, but it's not complicated. It's the future. We need to be prepared for a better future. So we have our speaker, Laurent Probst from PwC. He's a partner at PwC, and he will be guiding us through the methodology, framework, findings, and the recommendations. But before we start, let me please first welcome our virtual speakers. You know, the norms have changed. We have hundreds of people connecting online. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Please make sure to drop your questions in the Q&A section, and we will pick them up as we go. So let's start. The Future of Knowledge Foresight report is a partnership and a collaboration between the UNDP, the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation, and PwC. So back in 2018, the first report was out, and then in 2019, to address the technological disruption and to check on whether countries are prepared to tackle the technological risks and their preparedness to adapt to these risks. So, and this year, in 2021-2022, there was a shift because the risk landscape has changed. We have more environmental risks, health risks, and technological risks. So over to you, Laurent, to set the scene with the risks of tomorrow, the main findings, and the recommendations.
Thank you.
The clicker is on the screen and the green button.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to present you this report. This is a very important achievement by the MBRF, UNDP teams in collaboration with my team. I can tell you it was very tough, very difficult given the context. But I think we can be proud altogether to have issued this paper today, and particularly on this point about the transformative capacity model and how countries can use this framework, this model, to better address future risk. So I just would like to set the scene and to say, let's come back in 2019 when we published the latest report. What our conclusion at that time was that even if you have seen that countries are very well performing on the Global Knowledge Index, in fact, none of the countries were ready to address big disruptions. And that was one of our key conclusions. And when we started again to think about this report with Anthony, with his team, we say, okay, with the pandemic coming, we saw the problem, and we saw that none of the countries were ready to really face these new challenges and new crises. So we talked about the methodology to be able to address three risks. The health risk, first of all, because we were faced with a pandemic, crisis, but we had also other problems. Like, for instance, we looked at, for instance, all the deaths on non-communicable diseases, or we looked at the number of people who do not have access to primary care. So the health risk represents one of the major risks which could impact all countries across the globe. That's one element. The second element, we look at the technological risk, because as was said yesterday, 80% of a crime today is about cybercrime, or it's about data crime. Okay, so we need to be prepared to, I would say, big risk on technologies. And last but not least, the environmental risk. We need to take into account that. In 2019, we started to speak about it, and we included some of the elements on environment and sustainability. But now we have seen, unfortunately, over the last 2 years, all the damages and the cost of these environmental risks and the impact on population across the globe. So we put into this report also a set of figures. We try to describe as much as possible the different type of risk and their potential impact for the future. So our methodology and our objective into that are the following. First of all, our intention was to understand how countries leverage their transformative capacities, and I will come back to that in a moment, to deal with major global risks, so these three risks, and they build on their knowledge and skills dimension to generate solutions to better address the global risk. And the key knowledge dimensions are education, RDI, economy, enabling environment, technology, and also future skills. So these are a very important element for our framework, the key strategic dimensions of our framework. So what did we do? We, out of 150 million data sources, could be website, could be, I would say, a press release, it could be a Twitter post, could be any online input. In more than 180 languages, we analyzed, I would say, more than about 48 million data points to understand and categorize the mentions. Okay, to give you a concrete example, just to be very clear on this methodology. Imagine that you have, for instance, a country which has, in the moment of a pandemic crisis, said, okay, as for instance in the UAE, a private group created a specific lab to further research on the virus, okay, in collaboration with the university, in collaboration with the state. Ministry of Health. This initiative was described into a press release. So through our methodology, through our AI system, we detected this press release and we categorized this press release into the health risk, into the RDI dimension, knowledge dimension. Then it was clearly stated into our report. So this is the kind of example. This press release was used several times by people, was re-mentioned by several sources. So it's what we call the level of engagement. So we monitored this kind of events across 40 countries. And what we looked at the transformative capacity. To what extent is this initiative a collaboration or an innovation? In that case, I mentioned this was more a collaboration first, a collaborative initiative. And we use the 3D resilience framework as an overall framework to analyze our data. And this is highly important, but because we think that this transformative framework is really the way countries could better absorb, could better react, adapt, and transform when they are faced with big disruptions. We have some limitations. There are some limitations in our methodology. For instance, we have sometimes some data noise due to specific events. So for instance, when we had, at that time, this big media battle between Donald Trump and Greta Thunberg, then there was a big peak of mentions on environmental risk and so on. So, okay, there are some limitations, and we try to deal with different kind of limitations. This is described, the limitations are described into the report. We have covered 40 countries. This was a choice. We tried to regroup countries also by level of GKI maturity, and also by, I would say, to get also a good geographical coverage. The main results, some of the main results are, I'm going to present it now. So we see over time, from 2018 to 2021, we saw clearly a considerable increase of the levels of awareness for the 3 different risks. Okay? And you can see on the graph, on the blue line, you can see, which is the health risk, you can see the peak, which corresponds to March 2020. Okay, so just to give you a concrete point in time. The health risk represents the major, I would say, risk detected in our analysis. And that's a very important element compared to environmental risk and technological risk. And this is a consolidation above the 40 countries. Now, when we look at the transformative capacities, so among all the mentions, we looked at the how many mentions correspond to are related to transformative capacities, collaboration and innovation. What we have seen is that 27% of the mention correspond to transformative capacities. So we can say, is it good? Is it low? We don't know. Okay? The answer is we don't know because this is the first time we measure it. So, okay, it's not too bad to have already 27% of mentions which are related to a solution. So it means that for 2/3, for 3/4, more or less, of a mention, this is about describing the problem, this is about urgency, this is about we are in a crisis, okay? We describe the risk, and on 1/4 of the mentions are about describing a solution. It's about mentioning a solution. So we can see it in a positive way or in a negative way, but this is the starting point. And when we describe it by different risks, we see more or less the same level of awareness for the three risks: health, environment, and technology. Now, if we look on the collaboration dimension only, okay, when we look at the collaboration, we see that most of the countries have very low level of preparedness of partnerships and cooperation. Very, very low. Only, so in the case of environmental data, which is the highest score, we have only 17% of the mentions on solutions which corresponds to a collaboration or a potential partnership. What does it mean? It means that very few countries are prepared to collaborate and to address a risk. And this is due to the lack of existing infrastructures, lack of the right mindset for collaboration, the lack of a framework for collaboration. So here we can see a big, big area of improvement to help countries to better collaborate. It means also that the countries did not integrate partnership, collaboration into their core strategy to help them to fix a problem. They still think that they can do it on their own. But when you are a small country, I take my country as Luxembourg, for instance. When you're a small country with 600,000 people, how can you try to fix alone the environmental risk, or the technological risk, or the health risk? It's not possible. So you have to collaborate. So here there is a very important point about this collaboration capacity. And you can see that on the health risk, out of 40 countries, we have seen 27 countries which have mentioned this collaboration, at least one collaboration solution. Okay, but on technological risk, this is only 3 countries which mention a collaboration. So that's a signal also. When we look at collaborative capacities by knowledge dimensions, we see that most of them, they are looking at the enabling environment. They are related to enabling environment. What does it mean? It means that the country is looking at, perhaps we have a problem on the regulation, perhaps we have a policy issue. So we think about building a new policy. But a policy or regulation, it's still very theoretical. Does not mean that it translates into concrete solution for people, concrete solution for businesses. So this is, and you can see, oops, if I go back, you can see that, for instance, on RDI and education, very few mention. So people were not thinking about how to collaborate on RDI or in order to address this risk, or on education. If you look at innovative capacities, okay, same kind of conclusions. Innovative capacities are still, innovation ability is still low in terms of, I would say, capacity to react to address future risk. So the countries do not think about innovation to address future risk. Okay, this seems not to be into their core existing strategy, or not into their mindset. And this is a kind of a paradox, because when you look at the COVID crisis, the solutions, the vaccines came from some innovative companies, Moderna or BioNTech. So they come from 2 innovative companies. So we see that the future and the solutions will come from innovation So why do we have such a gap in terms of, I would say, infrastructure, mindset in countries? Why we know that the solutions will come from innovative solutions, innovative companies or organizations. Same conclusions for the innovative capacities per knowledge dimension, meaning that this is the enabling environment, which is the most important one, except for technology, economy attract the most important number of mentions. Why? Because generally on technology we can see a lot of innovations coming from private firms or digital firms or deep tech firms. Now, what is interesting to look at is to look at the top knowledge dimensions in mitigating future risk on the collaborative capacities. What we can see as a wrap-up, enabling environment is one, economy second, and so on. But what is interesting is to look at the lowest score on the knowledge dimension. What we see, education around a few percent, okay, 7 to 10%. Future skills, nothing. It means that at least during our analysis, on the 40 countries, education, future skills were not at all considered as a potential capacity, as a potential leverage, driver, trigger to address the future risk. When we look at innovative capacities, we have more or less the same pattern. We have the same pattern. So on innovation, it's still, I would say, a big problem, particularly on education and future skills, because we see that it was not mentioned, or very, very limited mentions into all online sources. And we have seen in the report, I really encourage you to read the report because you will find out some concrete.
إذن لدينا بعض الأمثلة.
In India, there was an initiative in a region to train public officials on innovations and to upskill them on innovation, to change a little bit their mindset and to be able to absorb the external innovation. And then this initiative was also a way for the police department to collaborate with startups to see how with startup they can better face with crime or, I would say, societal problems. So these kind of things are concrete solutions which are described into concrete initiatives described into the report, which were part of the mentions on education and future skills. So in terms of conclusions, I think what we see is overall countries remain on a very rigid model, okay? Traditional rigid model. And the fact that even if we see that the transformative capacities are increasing, this is still, I would say, this is improving, this is developing. We see clear differences between countries, and in online, I think very soon you will be provided also with country snapshot, where you will see all the detailed data per country on the following, on the analyzed 40 countries. And what we see is clearly that, okay, enabling environment, economy, and RDI and science are the most knowledge dimensions considered by governments. But at the same time, what I said is that the key concern is that education and future skills are very weakly represented into this analysis. Okay, so I think this is a kind of a wake up call again. Okay, because it seems that based on the analysis during our period, it's still very low. Why? We know that all the solutions will come from, I would say, a better understanding of a situation, and why we see all the information gap, the knowledge gap that we have on the new health crisis or environmental crisis that are coming. I think knowledge and education is really the key priority. So in terms of recommendation, what with a UNDP team we talked about. First thing would be to, at a national level, to define and implement I say implement, not just define, a nationwide multi-stakeholder SDG framework. Okay, to have this SDG framework to address this future risk and to really highlight the knowledge, so taking into account the knowledge dimension and making sure that we are ticking all the boxes. Okay, per knowledge. Do we have a policy? Do we have an investment plan? Do we have concrete projects for each one in order to tackle with a multi-stakeholder approach in order to better frame, better accelerate the collaboration between stakeholders, at least at nation level. The second thing is to make sure that in this framework we prioritize the skills. What are the most important skills that we need to have into the next 3, 5, 10 years to address the risk, to address, I would say, to ensure, I would say, the safety and the well-being of the population. As future risk will come, we need to play with scenario and foresight approaches, and with multi-stakeholders, with a multi-stakeholders approach, and then this could be also the way then to onboard international partners to better understand what kind of scenarios have been already designed and played in other territories to better learn from others. So that could be a point. And then stakeholders clearly have to act collectively, because we know that nobody today can find a solution, can face environmental risk, just as a case of pandemic risk and others. Okay? So we need to find the complementarity between the different stakeholders, and I think governments have to to include innovation and collaboration in any of their strategy as core pillars. And today it's just number 4, number 5, number 6 of a strategy, but it's not totally a core, a backbone of our strategy. So our recommendation there is to implement all these things, and what we have seen in the report and we have described in the report is we need concrete projects. We need concrete projects. It's even better to have a concrete project than a policy, because at least the concrete project, people will learn by doing, or the stakeholders will learn each other by doing, and that will be. And if you have policy and concrete project, that's really good. And the last point is about a specific focus on future skills. If we do not provide a population, a workforce with future skills, or a young generation with future skills, we will not be able to really address the future risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent, for this informative and rich presentation. I think for many of you, the but they're not, we're not surprised. We've seen in the time of the pandemic, many countries rushing to adopt policies that are macro policies, social distancing, but we haven't seen much of education, future skill strategies. So, Laurent, I think many out here, they're thinking, what's the contribution of this report? There are hundreds of reports out there. How does this report contribute to change? And what's its contribution to, if you want, to impact, not only change?
Yeah, I think this report could be used by any stakeholder. Okay, a university could be used by a government, a policy maker, a company, and identified really examples by dimensions, identify, I would say, country also practices or best practices, and then take initiatives. Okay, you can take this and go to your ministry, go to your CEO, go to your dean of a university and say, yeah, why not developing, I would say, a new curriculum or a new research project on cybersecurity? Let's bring the corporates together, let's bring the Ministry of Research together, and let's go for it. That's the kind of, we hope that this report will inspire people to act on a local basis in the 40 countries, but more than in 40 countries. I think that's really what would be the good point.
Yes, and what you mentioned, that we need to upskill and reskill our young. What about adults, the elderlies, like in their 40s? Should they be left behind and then the young take their jobs?
No, I think you're right. I think we need to upskill all people, all the workforce, and beyond the workforce, even the elderly people who are perhaps out of the workforce today, because we need to upskill them. Because otherwise, I think we will have a lot of people left behind, and that will create a big societal issue. Okay, so that's why on the last conclusion, it's insisting on the future skills. So we need to have governments, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, or even better, the Prime Minister of each country taking, I would say, developing a national upskilling plan for anyone in the country. And because I think at the end, and I think it was Norway who mentioned that into the upskilling, into the skill strategy, the population is the most important asset of a country.
What about individual actions, even in future skills and education? Like we're emphasizing a lot on the role of the government, but what about the private sector, the community, the locals, the citizens, the local communities as well, and NGOs? Like we're emphasizing a lot on the role of government. We've seen that governments are failing. Like, should we reconsider the structure of or the social contract between the government and citizens when it comes to education and social skills?
No, it's a common responsibility. It's a shared responsibility between the individual, the corporate, the trade unions, the business associations, okay, and the government. But it's clear that, for instance, if I take the workforce and the small, medium-sized companies, if they don't have an enabling environment for upskilling, their impact will be limited. So this is where the government could play. For big corporates, they can play on their own, no problem. But for the small SMEs and their people, we need a specific framework. Or for people who are outside of a job market, they need also a specific framework to help them to upskill.
Yes, and we have another question from the virtual audience asking, should we envisage the future or should we, yes, we're just taking one from the virtual and then we'll come back to the audience here. So they're asking, should we envisage the future or should we understand and the signals of change? So what are we doing now? Are we envisaging the future or we are just understanding the signals of change and preparing for a future that is complex, multifaceted, and so on?
I think we use this methodology as a way to detect signals, okay? And when we did the first edition, you remember, we were really to what extent this data could be a weak signal. So we tried to detect the weak signals through this 100 million sources, online sources, and then from that, try to say, how can we prepare for the future? Because the future, we will see different type of risk, and then how can we prepare in order to make the country more resilient, or a population more resilient? So that's really, and to give some example ideas, it's an open and developing work in progress, okay? So if you have also comments, things about how to improve the report, we would be delighted to get these comments and so on. Because
and you can check it on our Knowledge for All portal. And let's take a first round of questions from the audience. Can you please just hand them the mic? Yes.
Excuse me. Now, you know, in 2015, more than 192 countries signed UN SDG 2030. Do you think, and definitely out of this 40, the 40 may be included in 192. And from that time up to now and up to 2030, do you think that it will be some improvement? Or are you going to include the KPIs which is in your report in the future? Because it's a commitment, and for each SDG goal there is indicators, and it's committed to each country to monitor that. So that one, are you going to include it, or if you include it, it will be very good and useful. Thank you.
Okay. If you remember well, Anthony, when we had the initial discussions, we were looking at these SDG Kpis and what can we do to to approach or to measure these SDG KPIs. And I think we were not in a position to do that. So we developed this methodology to be able to detect some trends, signals, to what extent countries are moving forward the SDG targets. And so we use the SDG as a framework. It's totally in line with UNDP and the Global Knowledge Index, so we use the same framework. And this report is a way to detect some trends on how countries are moving to the SDGs. Okay, so.
Yes, just here also, the SDGs are embedded in the framework that we have, the knowledge dimensions of any economy. But ultimately, you tapped on an important point, which is financing the SDGs, which is a bottleneck. And this is why Laurent have mentioned also in his presentation, like we don't just need to have an SDG framework, we need to implement this framework. And implementation does not only come from one side, it should be a multi-stakeholder, from citizens to governments to local communities as well. So ultimately, the SDGs is at the core of this report, and this is why we have education, future skills, the enabling environment, RDI and science, technology, among others. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Brobest, for this outstanding and insightful insights. My name is Walid Hussein from the Saudi Arabian oil company, Saudi Aramco. I'm raising 2 points as a private citizen of the country. It has nothing to do with my role. First, and there is another brief question. Let's start with the concern that I have. So the report depicts the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as having low and medium performance in the 3 categories of the capacities, which is totally surprising. I've shared this report with some policymakers last night and friends, and we were all surprised. How come? The country has been doing a lot in these areas. We have been ranked significantly and competitively globally along these dimensions, and yet this outstanding report depicts us in a kind of unbalanced way, if you allow me to say that. I'm just reflecting these views as a citizen of a proud and of a proud nation. The other question that I have for you is this. Now, in this part of the world, the Middle East, there has always been a challenge translating innovation into impact. And there has always been an ongoing discussion on defining innovation. Corporate has a definition. Academic institutions has a definition. Government has definitions. So what enablers and ecosystem need to be established in the Middle East in order to translate innovation from an abstract concept into impact, helping economic development, creating jobs, providing support to entrepreneurship? That's all. Thank you very much.
I'll just come in first on the first question. When we developed this report, this report does not rank countries, so we do not have a ranking. Ultimately, Saudi Arabia is a very good example in the region. They're doing really well on all global indices, but this is not an index. So it does not measure countries, it measures them within and their capacities and across countries. So we are only covering 40 countries. We're not covering 192 countries. There are no ranks and scores. This is why you do not see them in the report. But I think here, Laurent, maybe if you can just expand more on the innovative capacity, the definition, maybe it gives better insights on how we define innovation and collaboration in the report.
Yeah. So I think what we looked at in all these initiatives, we look at collaboration, for instance, where we have partnerships, clearly stated public partnerships between university and a corporate, between, I would say, the state and a startup, okay, whatever. On innovation, it was clearly when we have a project which was clearly describing a new feature, a new venture, or a new thing. So these are the two elements. So we detect what was online on all the resources in 180 languages. Okay, and we analyze these data points, and we categorize them into that. And as Anthony said, it's not a ranking of countries. You say, okay, this is what we detected on Saudi Arabia during that period. Okay, That might be some also a bias, and it's described into the report. But I would say this is overall the point. So I cannot say more about that. We did a reliability check on all the information we collected and so on. We cross-checked with different teams and so on. So that's just, this is what we did.
What he tapped on is very important. He mentioned, I addressed it to policymakers. We do have the enabling environment. Again, this report covers 6 dimensions. So on the policymaking, they're doing great. But what about the ICT, the role of the private sector, the citizens? Are they engaging? Are they implementing? So this report does not only cover the role of the government, like what traditionally happens, or getting data from the government. We are doing a social media monitoring exercise from over 180 million data points. So again, while policymaking could be doing well, we need to see the implementation by the businesses, by also the citizens. So this is why it might be not the optimal results that you expected, but ultimately we can also go in depth, like what Laurent mentioned.
We can discuss it on a bilateral way,
have a case study,
having a more in-depth perspective. On the second element, on the how to further, I would say, implement innovation, I think the key point I see is skills. Okay, skills is the way to help people to understand how to implement innovation and why innovation is important. Today, even when I see in European countries, in European countries, governments, for instance, or even corporates, only a few people are really supportive of innovation. Okay, even in my company, in PwC, we are 3,000 people in Luxembourg. Okay, we are 10 innovators. Okay, and we are fighting every day. Okay, more and more people are saying, okay, we need to innovate, but it's still a big question. What and how much should we innovate? So, and because people do not understand what will be required in the future in terms of innovation to face with future challenges. Okay, so I think we still need to work massively on this knowledge dimension and skills dimension for innovation.
But also, like traditionally, we've known that European countries, they top the rankings on all global indices. But in this Future of Knowledge Foresight report, we see that these countries are not performing well as well. We see a striking result for Bangladesh, for instance, that they have adopted a national future skills strategy for 2045, if I recall well. This is very well, and they are implementing it. So when you read it at first, you would say, how come? But again, we need to check the details and how the methodology is going, and we can do case studies. But ultimately, we're open to all questions also over our email and our website. We have 2 more questions, if we can start here, because we have 3 questions. Whoa. We'll take the 3 of them. Okay, so we have one there, and then here, and then there. Okay, perfect. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. First, actually, I'm with Mr. Walid. We did a lot in the country of Saudi Arabia, and I think the indication or the index, it doesn't show the reality usually. It's normal because it's based on information that you have. However, I'm with you too, that, innovation, it has multiple things, which is like, first to start with the innovation culture, establishing that innovation culture, then the acceptance of the production of innovation culture, which is sometimes there is innovation culture within a specific society or even corporate or company or government, but the production of that or the product that comes from innovation, it's not accepted or admitted or even adopted by let's say, the decision makers. My question actually, it's related to something else, which is related to, I think we are overacting because of coronavirus. And I'm worried about, what we do now, it will make us get trapped with another risk that was not expected. في مثل عربي يقول لك من مأمنه يؤتى الحذر. So I think we are like, there is 2 windows, and we are just looking to that window. Then there is other window that will bring the second risk, and it hit us again. So my worries is about, what we all do now. It's thinking about the future risks, future skills, And we are preparing ourselves for that while we are missing a lot. As an example, unemployment risk. Now we are going all to, let's say, artificial intelligence that will make us get lost, of a lot of jobs, and raising the employment rate. As an example in that, education. Now we have thousands of teachers. We can, with one solution, lose them all. We don't need teachers at all. We need one teacher for math, the best teacher, and teaching the whole country. Such issues, I think, we need, I think, from the policymaker to mitigate and have adjusting the policies to not go rushing to those things, I think.
Yeah, fully agree with you. I think when we try to take these three risks, these are three large risks, okay? But you try to have also all the dimensions to cover it, to cover what could happen to a society, what could happen to a population. And the employment risk is covered into our analysis because we take into account the education and we take into account the future skills. And if we ask governments today to better invest into population skills and to upskill their people, this is to manage the employment risk. We push also a lot for upskilling the teachers, because the teachers have to move to a new pedagogy, they have to move to new domains to be able to stay relevant for society. Okay. And that's part of this is a way to mitigate the risk for people. So upskilling is key to address any kind of risk.
Yeah, just one small comment here. I believe in 5 years, if we do the report again, I'm pretty sure all the development projects and policies that Saudi Arabia is doing, they will be reflected. Because for any policy, development policy, to drive impact, it would need at least 5 to 10 years. So I think if we do the report again in 5 years and we study and we examine these signals, I'm pretty sure that the results ultimately will change. Because what we're doing is we're studying the social media monitoring, so big data. So it's a timely data, So we need to keep track of this data and see how countries are evolving over time. And this is what Laurent mentioned, like we cannot say if it's good or bad, but we can say there's a limited transformation capacity. Is it good? Is it bad? We don't know. It's limited. And this is why we are encouraging countries to mobilize additional resources into their collaborative and transformative, and this does not happen overnight.
Or sharing economy, which is, I think we are moving from unemployment or employment system, which is like, corporates and companies, to freelancing, everyone. That will make it will make a new hit. Something new comes to the society, which is a social impact more than environmental, all of these things. What we are doing now, we are transforming all of our economy sectors to getting to that gradually, and that will receive within 7 years' time a new hit about social issues and other problems, and we are fixing that all problems. However, my question is not about how we are ranked. We know what we are doing, and by the way, there is a project of future skills. It has been established since 2 years. It's before actually Corona, and it's in many sectors they are doing that. Each sector is doing their efforts separately, but there is a project, huge project for future skills. Thank you.
All right, do you have a question? Yes.
First of all, we are appreciating what you are doing, because most future studies are difficult to be done, and I need a lot of methodology aspects and discussions about it. But I think I agree with what they are saying, that innovation is multi-dimensional and multi-definitional issue. And despite the fact that we have Oslo manual, which describes this in detail, there is other type of innovation, like societal innovation, like industrial innovation, and so on. So innovation, and there is also ecosystem innovation. And this comes to my first question. Because in Europe now there is ecosystem innovation estimates. Did you try to rely on this in order to enhance your study or not? This is my first question about environmental innovation, because now it's moving fast towards having indicators which is going towards environmental innovation. The second one is that about education and future skills. Yeah, and let's be frank. Up till now, education is not concentrating on skills. It's concentrating on other things, and I think we agree about this. So future skills is something related to the fourth generation industrial revolution. And despite the fact that now we have 40 years people discussing future jobs, we have to change skills. Do you think that there is no success up till now in this trend or not, or what we are going to do? The last question is very specific, because, you know, I discussed with you before, to what extent do you have confidence on the information, this large amount of information that you collected from different sources? Part of these sources are we can accept, part of them related in social data and so on. And you are talking about artificial intelligence. I think in your case, it's very important to rely on big data and big data analytics and big data tools in order to work with this large amount of data. Thank you very much.
So on innovation ecosystem, I think an innovation ecosystem, what I see when it's working, it's a result of a collaboration between the different stakeholders. So it's well mapped, people know each other, they work together in a collaborative model, and it's working. So I think we took it into account in our methodology, in our analysis, because this is the result of this collaboration dimension. On the evolution, on the education and skills, I saw the two things. I saw, I would say, the emergence over the last 2-3 years, for instance, by engineering schools, of much more really tailored curriculum linked to the needs of industries and so on. So that was really a good point. But I saw also a lot of universities totally blocked into the transformation of their curriculum, linked also to some, I would say, the difficulty and the time to update a curriculum and so on. But here I see a big area of improvement from universities to systematically upgrade and adapt their curriculum to this new demand, new skills demand.
So, our last question.
Thank you so much for such an insightful report. I'm going to talk from I'm going to downscale it to the individual. I'm in transition period now. I've just returned from the UK after working and studying. I'm a biomedical scientist. So I'm going through that upskilling and in-between futuristic vision. And from my readings, like humble readings, I would say, like you mentioned earlier, policymakers can take their time, which is totally understandable because you're controlling the nation. Do you agree, meanwhile, while we're waiting for change, rather than waiting for change, taking charge? For example, learning about, you know, the current new skills at the moment, which is my personal experience at the moment. While I was working in the laboratory during the COVID period, for me, it inspired me to study further, like healthcare management, and introduced me into digital health and eventually NFT, which I never knew what it stands for. Now I can say it confidently, but a week ago I didn't know what it was. So from a personal or a scientific perspective and going through transition and career, you know, transition, do you agree that while we are, I will speak about it, I will be writing about it and say, look, guys, rather than you waiting, make a change because we all can, you know, add up eventually. Do you agree that the younger generation or the in-between generation, I don't want to be showing my age, but yes, do you agree at that time we should continue taking charge and upskilling and even being vocal about it? Hopefully the policymakers will realize, okay, we need to take the initiative now rather than waiting like what you meant for the next report. Yeah. My other comment, which could be personal, you might not answer it. were you expecting the final results? Like I was surprised, like certain countries were not participating or not highlighted. Like you said, it's not a scale, but were you surprised by the results? That's it really. So I just wanted to, now what's the solution for, if we downscale it to the individual level like myself? Do you think we should just continue, being vocal about it and, what, take charge, do what you need to do, upskill, like social media, like you said. I'm a fan of social media. I've benefited from it immensely, and I'm still, it is a commitment. You have to make the effort to, you can't say, oh, I don't know now. Everything's available online. Just make the time that you're scrolling down, just that 5 minutes, you can read something insightful. Sorry, I'm not being defensive, but yeah, so do you think that's the solution? Take charge while you waiting for the lovely policymakers. All due respect to all of them. No offense here.
No, I think it's a shared responsibility. So it's clear that everyone has to look at what they can do, what they can use. It's clear that for people who have access to internet and the use, we have fantastic resources to do that. I started also NFT 2 weeks ago, so we're on the same line. And I feel personally, for instance, even not the young generation, but also some other people, I feel that in some areas I'm totally disconnected. I have some concern because in some areas I do not understand what's happening. So I say, okay, you need to spend time over there to understand this, because I cannot stay. I had the case 6 months later, 6 months previously on net zero emissions. Okay, how do you calculate net zero emissions? The same problem. So I think it's a shared responsibility for people, but it's also at the company level and at a government level also to put in place the enabling environment. Okay, at least this is the minimum to be done at the government level. Put an enabling environment to make it. That's just the point, and potentially provide some incentives to do it. Like Singapore, for instance, they have a fantastic upskilling program at a citizen level. So each person could upskill to learn language, to learn NFT, to learn whatever they want. But that's great.
I haven't started NFTs, and I'm not planning to start anytime soon. I hope this is not the future. And by that, we come to the end of our session. Thank you so much, people here, and those who are attending virtually. Thank you so much.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.